From one really powerful woman to another, it is my great honor to introduce our next speaker. As the mother of a young daughter, who I hope will have the choice to pursue any future that she wants, meeting Cecile Richards is a little bit like meeting a rock star for me. And as I learned more about her background, I realized that leadership and fighting for people's rights is literally in her blood. Her mother was former Texas Governor Ann Richards. Her father, David Richards, was a lawyer who focused on civil rights, free press, and labor unions. And apparently, Cecile started pretty young in her activism. She apparently was disciplined in high school for protesting the Vietnam War. At age 16, she helped her mother campaign for Sarah Weddington, who's the attorney who won Roe v. Wade. So she's already was started on the career that she now has. But it's not just in her blood. Cecile's career choices and her incredible leadership skills have taken her from a career from service as a labor organizer to helping to found America Votes, to becoming Deputy Chief of Staff for House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi. Cecile serves on the board of the Ford Foundation, which focuses a lot on issues of inclusive growth. And over the past decade, she has become one of this country's most important defenders of women's health and reproductive rights. As president of Planned Parenthood, she leads a movement that has worked for more than a century to build a healthier and safer world for women and teens. Every year, approximately 650 Planned Parenthood affiliate health centers nationwide provide healthcare services to 2.5 million patients, as well as sex education and outreach to 1.5 million people. Since joining Planned Parenthood a decade ago, Richard has expanded its advocacy for access to healthcare and ensured that Planned Parenthood played a pivotal role in shaping healthcare coverage and services for women under the Affordable Care Act. And I think you're going to hear a bit more this afternoon about how she's still fighting to make sure that we don't go backwards on many of those great achievements, and how she sees the role of the business community in protecting and promoting human rights. Please join me in welcoming Cecile Richards.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lori. That was great. Hi. Thanks for waiting till the bitter end. I understand I'm it. So I'm really grateful that you're here. And I was just struck by Lori's comments and Audrey's. And Lori, you said something about like, how do you decide what you invest in and what lens do you use? And this is not what my speech is about, but I'll just say, I believe that the folks that are going to change this globe and that are on the forefront of fighting, not only here, but around the world, are women of color. So if you just invest in them, you're gonna do a good thing for the country. And I'm glad my friend Shamina Singh is here from MasterCard. Thank you, Shamina, for the shout out earlier and the good work that you're doing. I love the thought that 25 years ago, a small group of entrepreneurs came together, united in the belief that making products that people love wasn't enough. You actually also had to try to make the world a better place. And so that BSR was launched with the support of Ben Cohen of Ben & Jerry's and Anita Roddick of The Body Shop and Stonyfield Farms co-founder Gary Hirschberg, which sounds like the most ragtag group of hippies I can possibly imagine. And it's just fantastic to think that what they started with this vision has now grown into this incredibly important global movement of business leaders standing up for sustainability and justice and equity. And I think as probably you have heard over the last 3 days, we've never needed you more than we need you today. So what I want to talk about a little bit is at a time in which women in the US are literally half of the workforce, more than half the graduate students in many fields, and for the first time actually more than half of the college graduates. It's a perfect time to talk with you. Because I want to challenge you just to think about this, and that is, what if the world's most recognizable brands and companies became synonymous with being champions for women, for your employees, for your consumers, and your CEOs and leaders? Because I think what I've observed is that for decades, women in America have fit themselves into workplaces and a world that was built for men. Am I right? It just feels that way. And for some women, I think they don't even think about it. The millions of little allowances that we make every day, they're just automatic, from laughing off crude jokes to losing sleep, thinking about what happens if this meeting runs too long and I can't pick up the kids. And I think for some women, they haven't even thought about it until now, when something as basic as access to birth control that millions of women rely on to finish school and succeed in their careers is actually in jeopardy in the US. And frankly, when everyone in America is finally talking about sexual harassment in the workplace. I think one of the reasons, of course, that it has been complicated is there is a very unique aspect about women, and I'm just going to get it out there. We reproduce. That's just the truth of the matter, right? Let's be honest. We get pregnant. Sometimes we get pregnant a lot. And we also spend a lot of time and a lot of years trying not to get pregnant. In fact, one of my favorite statistics the Guttmacher Institute wrote. What's that? Yeah, okay. Well, since y'all are business leaders, I'm going to give you a great fact. The Guttmacher Institute estimates that the average woman in America who wants to have children has an average of 2.3 children and spends 5 years trying to get pregnant and have children. And she spends an average of 30 years trying not to get pregnant, okay? So that's a lot of health care in America, and that's a lot of birth control. And yet, the whole idea of women reproducing has so often, and too often, for employers been treated as, one, a nuisance, and two, an inherent weakness in the female species. I think the good news is today, though, women are more than ever before shaking the foundations. They are questioning assumptions, and they're shining a light on the way we are treated, seen, and valued at work and in society. And frankly, it's time to quit trying to retrofit women to the workplace and start reimagining a workplace where women are full and equal partners. How radical would that be? I think the exciting thing and why I was so excited to come and see you today is I think the good news is that business and business leaders are the best positioned and have the potential to lead us out of the patriarchy and into the light. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. So going back, we're a little bit older than BSR. Planned Parenthood was started 100 years ago. And over the last century, we've seen that actually access to reproductive health care is the single biggest reason that women have been able to enter the workforce. This is actually in 1916. We were started before birth control was legal. It cost 10 cents to get a pamphlet about how to prevent another pregnancy. It was completely illegal at the time. Our founder was thrown in jail, busted by a woman cop pretending to be a mother. But Margaret was busted, thrown in jail, where she taught all of her fellow inmates about birth control. And that's how our movement was launched. It actually took 50 years for the Supreme Court to decide that married couples could actually legally use birth control. So hallelujah for that. But a lot of things have taken place since then. And today, the number of women graduating from college, 6 times what it was before birth control was legal. And in fact, one study out of the University of Michigan found that 1/3 of women's wage gains since the 1960s are due to the birth control pill, okay? Now just think how much higher that number would be if we were actually getting equal pay in America, okay? Wrap your head around that. Women are CFOs, they're back-end coders, financial analysts, communications directors. I mean, look around this room. Women are leaders in all parts of our industry. My favorite recent statistic is that the most recent class of NASA astronauts to complete training was 50% women for the first time in history. So that gives you hope. I mean, feels good. And this is another factor I love, a fact I love that I think I actually may use on a future action. Women are not only half the labor force, but experts estimate that if all paid working women took 1 day off of work, maybe altogether, the United States would lose $21 billion in GDP. Think about it, women. It's a good action. So women are already, I mean, we're fueling the economy, and I think you ain't seen nothing yet. Just imagine what we could do if government and business actually unleashed our full potential. And yet, even as we have made all this extraordinary progress, we've seen a backlash of hostility and resentment with politicians in the country trying to end access to Planned Parenthood and reproductive health care more broadly. The most recent outrage, although it's hard to keep track, but the most recent outrage was the administration has now announced that they're going to make it easier for a woman's boss to determine whether or not she's going to get access to birth control, that they can raise their own moral or religious objections and no longer cover birth control. But don't worry, actually, the folks in charge of our family planning program at the U.S. government are now suggesting a new alternative to this. They want to go back. This is actually a leaked memo that came out. They want to go back to natural family planning. Now, I don't know if you all know what that is. I think this is something that existed around when my mom was around. It was known as the rhythm method, okay? So do you know what we call couples at Planned Parenthood who use the rhythm method? Parents, exactly. That's exactly right. You cannot make this stuff up. I mean, these are not just bad policies. They are terrible business decisions. And I think the other thing, and you may have talked about this some this week, is that these are not just domestic issues. These are global issues for all of you who are thinking about the global economy. Years of research, and I know that there have been so many studies done and so many talks given on the fact that in countries where women are empowered, where they have full rights and autonomy, those countries have stronger economies with lower rates of poverty, lower rates of homelessness. And not only that, these are countries that are more peaceful, more secure, and less vulnerable to terrorism. A decade ago, America ranked #1 in the world for women's health. Do you know what it is today? 62nd. We have the highest rate of maternal mortality in the developed world, and we're the only industrialized country without any paid family leave. Frankly, the United States is failing women, and we have to do better. The rest of the world, too, is watching us to see whether we rise to this challenge or whether we fall behind. But I think to the comments made earlier, take heart, because I actually believe that business has led and can continue to lead where government is lagging behind. Companies like Microsoft and Levi Strauss set examples for how to treat LGBTQ employees back in the day in the workplace, and were among the first to receive 100% ratings from the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. Businesses have stopped backward policies in their tracks by threatening to take their business out of states like Indiana and North Carolina after their governments backed discriminatory legislation. You've stepped up when it comes to climate change, to gun violence prevention. You've stood up for the rights of immigrants and refugees because they are your employees and your board members and your CEOs. And here's my challenge to you. It is high time we do the same for women. Now, and it's not just political correctness or mercy or pity. It's because it is the right thing to do. And because women are the key to the economic future of this country and of the world. And I really want to applaud BSR and Aditi Mohapatra, who I don't think is here right now, but has done great work with your member companies for the work through the HER project over the last 10 years. And I know that her health initiative in particular is already showing incredible results in expanding access to family planning and connecting women to local clinics and preventing diseases like HIV and AIDS. But now we have to keep going, not only around the globe, but here in the US. You are the biggest, loudest voices in our country. And if you don't like this vision of America that the administration is articulating, now is the time to offer an alternative. In the words of my friend, CEO of Tumblr, David Karp, who sits on our national board, I don't think any of us can afford to sit this out. And he's right. We need a new compact with business for women's full equality, for the women who work for you, for the women who would like to work for you, and for the women who want to look up to you and your brand as a force for good in the world. You've probably already heard this, and I think actually Audrey may have mentioned it. One recent study shows that 9 in 10 millennials would switch brands to one associated with a cause that was important to them. And another poll showed that 80% of all women, just listen to this, 80% of all women believe that brands should be standing up for women's rights with the same intensity they stood up for LGBTQ rights. So what are you waiting for? It's time to take this on. Now, as a lifetime organizer, I never like to leave without giving marching orders. And so here are 4 things that I hope every one of you will consider doing. And if you already tweeted about something, you could actually tweet about something else as well. So first, today, Planned Parenthood is launching a national Fight for Birth Control campaign, and I hope that you will join us. I really want to thank folks who already have. Exactly. I mean, it's hugely popular. Everyone uses it, and they love it. I mean, It's important to remember, too, that thanks in part, all the fights we made under Obamacare, 62 million women in this country are getting no-cost birth control in their insurance plans for the first time in our history. It's revolutionary. It's been important. We are actually now, partly as a result, we're at a 30-year low for unintended pregnancy. We're at a historic all-time low for teenage pregnancy in the United States of America. We absolutely cannot go back. We cannot go back. So, even though the administration wants to go backwards, you can do your part by continuing that progress by committing to protect important health care coverage for employees. Earlier this month, Kodak announced that they're going to continue to cover birth control for their employees no matter what the administration says. And I know I just read that Universal Music just signed on, and Warner as well. You can go to fightforbirthcontrol.org and for more ways to get involved. The second thing you can do is join up with entire industries, from technology to fashion, who have been standing with Planned Parenthood in this last year. So we've been waiting for the moment to speak out loudly and proudly. This is it. I'm just saying this. If Anna Wintour can go to Fashion Week with a perfectly designed outfit and put a big pink I Stand with Planned Parenthood button on her jacket, you can do that too, okay? That takes a lot. But she did. You can post on social media. You can put out a public statement, or even better, talk to us about how your company or industry can partner with Planned Parenthood in our ongoing effort to ensure reproductive access for everyone. And it's not just for women. Actually, our fastest growing client base are men. They're about 10% of our patients. In fact, I was over in San Diego the other day and to visit the health center, and I looked in the waiting room, and it's all guys. And instead of a soap opera being up on the TV, which it usually is, it was ESPN. And I said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, it's vasectomy day at Planned Parenthood today." So. And we're constantly expanding reproductive health care services that we provide. A growing number of our health centers are providing hormone replacement therapy, and we're proud to serve the transgender community and anyone in need of affordable health care. Because health care shouldn't be a privilege, it's a fundamental human right. Number 3 is, and I'm sure you're all thinking about this, but think about if your workplace is a place that makes it easier or harder for women to succeed. Ask yourself, do you offer paid family leave and pay women equally? Do you cover a full range of reproductive health care? Do you take sexual harassment and sexual assault seriously? And if the answer to any of those is no, it's time to get in gear. Don't wait for another woman to raise her hand and say, "Me too." Got it? And fourth, you've got to make the fight for reproductive rights in America your fight too. So as we speak, states across this country, as well as the US Congress, are trying to erode a constitutional right that women have had for decades. And that is the right for every woman to make her own decision about her pregnancy. And if you think this is an issue that doesn't affect you, it directly affects someone you know. A woman who works for you, a woman in your family, a woman in this room. 1 in 4 women in America has had an abortion, and I'm one of them. And it is hard to accept that our daughters would have fewer rights than we have. It's unacceptable. And yet the right to safe and legal abortion is in jeopardy in states across America. Some of you may have seen the story this week of a teenager in Texas that was held by the US government and denied access to abortion. It made national news. And even though she was eventually, through help with the ACLU, give it up for them for actually litigating this case, even though she was eventually able to get the health care that she needed, this is a cautionary tale about what happens when the government is making these decisions, personal medical decisions, instead of women. It's not someone else's problem. This is our problem. This is your problem. So if you're for women's rights, you have to be for the full range of women's rights, and you have to be in it with us for the long haul. So the day after the inauguration, as you know, more than 4 million people marched for women's rights across the United States of America, the biggest demonstration ever in our history. And I hope many of you were there. The thing that's important about it, though, to me, was people didn't just march in Washington and New York. We had 10,000 people in Salt Lake City, Utah. There were folks marching in the rain in Tallahassee, Florida. And there were folks actually marching in a blizzard in Fairbanks, Alaska, right? That's commitment. Those are your consumers. Those are your employees. They marched on every continent around the world. And I love to shout out the women scientists who were marching at the South Pole. But the important thing is it wasn't just women who marched. There were fathers and grandfathers who believed their daughters and their granddaughters deserve every single opportunity in the world. There were brothers who want their sisters to have every right they do. Heck, my son was there. And a whole lot of good, decent men who understand that this is a question of basic fairness. The progress we need can only happen when it's no longer just women fighting for ourselves, but when the whole world joins in. So everyone in this room may come from a different background or a different field, but we share the same bold vision for a future where everyone is free to live their best life and live up to their full potential. That's what Planned Parenthood has been about for the last 100 years. And now going into our second century, we're going to be even bolder and think even bigger. So now's the time to be bold and brave with us, to stand with us not only on the right side of history, but more importantly, on the right side of the future. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Well, you've all got your marching orders. Thank you so much. That was incredibly inspiring and I think a little bit of what we all needed to hear. So thank you. I want to start with something that you talked a lot about, but I want to get more specific because I think sometimes we stay at the generalities, and that's the link between women's health and their economic empowerment. And specifically, why is it so important that we actually have to talk about the words reproductive health? It's not just women's issues or women's health. Why is it so important that we specifically call it out?
Well, it's clearly, as I said earlier, is that is the one thing we do is we reproduce, and it's interesting. One thing that we didn't talk about, but this whole birth control effort to roll back birth control. You know, there are something like 60% of women who use birth control at some point use it for something in addition to, or even as an alternative to preventing unintended pregnancy. So it is a basic healthcare need for women. And I think, though, unless we explicitly talk about this healthcare need, because it is unique to us, then we get left behind. I saw it, you know, in the fight for the Affordable Care Act, which was a real fight to get birth control coverage. We had to rally and mobilize and have folks make this case, and that was actually one of the best calls of my life, was when President Obama called to say he was about to announce they're going to finally cover birth control for all women in the U.S. But it may sound crazy that these are issues we have to talk about, but I will never forget one of the fights we had in Congress was over maternity benefits. The Senate was literally debating, and actually under this most recent effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act, they debated again. One of the senators, senator from Arizona, who I will not name right now, but said that he didn't think that they should have to cover maternity benefits because he was never going to need them, and which seemed rather obvious. But the beautiful thing is Senator Debbie Stabenow actually spoke right up. Senator from Michigan said, "Well, I bet your mother did," and that kind of like shut that whole thing down. But I just think we have to really lift up these issues. There's a lot of mystery by a lot of people in office about how women's bodies works, and that's why they shouldn't be in charge of making those decisions for us. Yeah.
I think that might also be why we need more women in office.
Well, as I say, I mean, this is what's, it is amazing to see the women. I have such admiration for women in Congress and women in office because it's not an easy load, and they're always in a minority. But listen, if a majority of members of Congress could get pregnant, we would not be fighting about Planned Parenthood or any of these issues anymore,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So that's a goal.
So let's talk a little bit more about policy, because you've been involved in policy your whole career from different angles. In today's political climate, and we've talked a lot about how volatile the political climate is and how important it is for businesses to use their voice, and you gave a lot of the different examples where business has used their voice. But how do they decide when should they use their voice? When do they have to stay silent? How many chips are they going to have? If they're going to need to fight for something else, do they stay quiet now? So what's your advice in terms of how businesses enter this kind of new world of policy engagement?
Well, I mean, particularly in the area I work in, which is primarily women's health, it is hold the women in your world up here and do right by them. And I don't care whether they're your employees or they're your consumers or your partners or your daughters or your granddaughters, do right by them. Because that, I mean, I think that I just firmly believe, and I think there's enough evidence to show that when you do right by them, you'll be doing the right thing, you'll be doing right by your business as well. One of the things that is really, and it's hard, I mean, we're seeing so much evidence now with all of the sexual harassment stories that are coming out, is women's voices and women's opinions and just women's engagement has been so suppressed that, boy, if you were out there and you actually stood up so strongly for women's rights, just imagine how women would flock to your business. I'm excited to see businesses coming forward now. And I think that actually I do think the future is female, and I think any business that wants to be ahead of the curve should put women right in the center of when they think about their own policies, their workplace policies, and the policies that they support in public.
Great. You know, you've got a good audience here. So you've got a pretty willing audience and an audience that hopefully will take up those marching orders. Yeah. As you referenced, you know, we've got 10 years of the HER Project where a lot of companies around the table have been involved. Right. And yet they often ask, all right, so what do we do back at home, right? Your point around, you know, the distinction between where the U.S. women's healthcare system is compared to the rest of the world is embarrassing. It's horrendous. Right. And so give us some examples. How are you actually working with businesses? What can a company actually do with you, and how might they partner?
Well, I mean, I'll just give you a good example of, you know, we have the maternal mortality rate in this country is going up. It's outrageous. And I'll just give an example of my home state of Texas, where the legislature decided to shut down the women's healthcare program in the state of Texas. And of course, the folks that it really affected were women of color, women with low incomes. And now we are seeing a doubling of the maternal mortality rate, totally preventable, completely preventable, directly related to women's lack of access to care. Well, what if when the Texas legislature has said we're going to end women's health care program in the state, businesses in this room, and it wouldn't have taken many, had said, we're no longer going to, we're not going to hold our conferences, we're not going to expand, because we believe women should be equal partners in our as employees and as our consumers. That would make a huge difference. And I hate to say it, there's examples all across the country. I think that this has been very hard to get businesses to step up and speak out for women's health and rights. There's so much stigma and shame that women have suffered, and again, women of color the most. But boy, it would make a huge difference, any business that did. And if you need an idea of a place you could do this, absolutely, get in touch with me. I've got a list. And I do think, I mean, look, and some of the really bold elected officials have said this. It's like, how can we grow our economy in a specific state if we're actually going to have to tell women who are going to potentially move there to work for us, well, here are some things you ought to know. You're not going to get paid equally. You're not going to have access to birth control. You're not going to have access to safe and legal abortion. You're not going to be able to make your own decisions about your pregnancies. I think it's going to be very difficult for businesses to grow when that's the case. And we need to start making examples of folks who lift up those issues. And do you see the stigma changing? I mean, so you talked a little bit about what's going to happen today. So you do see it changing. I do. I mean, it's interesting. And in my years at Planned Parenthood, I'd say, particularly, and I'll just talk about the topic that no one ever wants to talk about, which is abortion. Abortion has been a legal right for more than 40 years. It is, I mean, we're at the lowest rate of abortion actually since Roe was decided, because we've been doing such a great job on birth control. So for any of your folks who want to think about what can you do, like, you should absolutely support access to birth control, because it reduces unintended pregnancy, which seems like an obvious point, but Congress seems to have missed that. So I think it's important to recognize that now young people in particular, the reproductive justice community, are sharing their abortion stories. I shared my story, and I feel like anything we can do to take this out of the shadows and say, these are just decisions that women have to make for a whole host of reasons. And we've got to get it out of the stigmatized place that it has been. And I think it's important that businesses stand up and say, we will support full insurance coverage for all reproductive health care for our employees. It'll be good for your employees, it's good for your business.
Excellent. So you hinted at the role of men, and we've got a lot of men in the room. So how do we get male leadership on this solution so that it's not just women in Congress versus men in Congress, or women leaders in business versus male leaders in business? How do we get men to actually take charge?
I actually think men have been doing an incredible job. So I just want to give a shout out to the men that are here, and you stayed. I mean, for one thing, you stayed to listen to this. But yeah, let's give it up for the men. I mean, I do think, it's interesting. I was at a conference right before the election and heard Mayor Khan from London, as well as Justin Trudeau, talk about the critical role that women played in their economies, in growing their economies, and that not only it was the right thing to do, but it was the economically smart thing to do. I see Tim Cook talk about the importance of women in STEM programs and teaching young women so that they can be part of half of the workforce as Apple, and that if we don't, we're going to fall behind. So I actually feel like I'm seeing more men stand up and speak out, and that's what we need, because this is not a women's problem. This is a human issue. And again, I think it's I've been really, really encouraged. I mean, at Planned Parenthood, we've seen this last year just an outpouring of activists like we've never seen before. I mean, we started a few years ago with 3 million supporters. We now have almost 11 million. And a lot of them are young men who absolutely cannot imagine living in a world in which women didn't have equal rights. So I think there's an exciting generational change. And I think for fathers who can't imagine now that their daughters wouldn't have every opportunity to finish school and have a career.
Yeah, it's scary to think that we're going backwards, right? And
we're not going to go
really
backwards.
Fearful.
I mean, and that's the other thing I would say is, you hear certain things from our president, you hear certain things from Congress. That is not where the American people are. In fact, the crazy thing is, the more Planned Parenthood got attacked this year, the more popular we became. I think at the last vote where they were going to, actually Fox News had to report this, right before they were trying to take the last vote to defund us, 80% of Americans supported federal funding for Planned Parenthood. Right? That is crazy. And when Fox News reports it,
must be true.
Yeah, you've arrived. You've arrived. So. No, but I just mean that I think it's really common, and I think it's because people recognize that they need access to affordable health care in this country, and that's what Planned Parenthood represents.
Great. So I'm going to open it up to questions via Twitter. So start thinking of what you want to ask while I ask one more personal question. And the theme for our conference is how business leads. And you've been a role model to a lot of people this year. You've been a role model for a long time, but especially this year, because women in this country have been looking for steadfast leadership, right? And people in this country have been looking for someone to stand up for their beliefs, even when it's hard. And you've been attacked, you've been trolled like nobody's been trolled. You have had to stand up and say that you're gonna risk funding cuts to Planned Parenthood because you're not going to give in on certain issues, even if that meant those funding cuts meant people might not get your valuable health services. So you've been able to really stand up despite that criticism. Mm-hmm. How do you do it? And how do you lead through that kind of ongoing onslaught? Well, I mean, I was really fortunate. My mom was Ann Richards, and so it was sort of like that's what you had to do, right? I mean, so we can't pick who our parents are, but I was really fortunate, and I think that, look, I've kind of always been raised to believe that if you weren't pissing someone off, you really weren't doing your job, and I do think this is where we do have to stand up, and particularly this moment when people are looking to see, are folks willing to take on important issues. And for me at Planned Parenthood, I am incredibly blessed to have this job, and I think the toughest thing right now, and it may be for some of the folks in this room, is to be in jobs where you're trying to figure out how you can make a difference. I think that's the toughest part of it. And for me, every single day that I get up and we're able to keep the doors open at Planned Parenthood, we did the math, approximately 8,118 people get health care that day. That is highly motivating. And when I think of the women and the young people who are counting on us, who are standing outside of our health centers ready for us to open, it makes it very easy to do my job, and makes me very proud to be with Planned Parenthood. You know, we opened the conference, Aaron Kramer, our CEO, said, you know, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, but we are privileged to be able to get up every day and do something about it. And I think that really resonates. No, that's right. So let's open it up to some of our Twitter questions. I think they're appearing on the screen. All right. So how can you've made a good case around how businesses can take action in terms of ensuring coverage for birth control at their companies. What if the business is not on board? What can individuals do to get their companies on board?
I think this is the perfect time. I mean, this is the incredible thing is right now is like what we call it's a movement moment, and this is the time I think every employer and company is probably thinking about what am I doing for women and with women, and so there's never been a better time I think to organize and say it's time for equity, and it's time for equity in reproductive health care and a lot of other issues that obviously affect women as well as men, whether it is paid family leave, whether it's equal pay. And I know there's a lot of businesses that are really on the lead, but this is a time to normalize these conversations, and it's a moment. I say take advantage of it now.
So seize that moment.
Yeah.
So you gave the example of Texas and what happened in terms of the impact of the decision to limit access to healthcare. Can you give some more examples about what happens to business growth in states that do limit women's access to healthcare? Do we actually have that data, and are we able to prove that case?
I don't think we really have that data, although we obviously have data that shows the declining healthcare for women in particular states. So I'll just, and look, I can't do the math in every state, but unintended pregnancy and teenage pregnancy is a very, very expensive thing in the United States of America. It costs businesses money, it costs taxpayers money, and so it's very easy to make the correlation between having actually access to not only reproductive health care, but preventive health care. And that I think it definitely affects every single business. I just think it's time that we have to get ahead of it and not be reactive. Again, think about not fitting women into business, but actually saying, how could we make our business the very best so that women would want to work here, could work here, and could be really productive, and that we could get more consumers because we stood with women.
Absolutely. What do you think is the impact of the pretty miserable numbers in terms of female CEOs and board members? And do you think that support for reproductive health issues by corporations is hindered because there's not enough women in leadership?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that are hindered by not enough women in leadership, and that's just one of them. And there's some like crazy statistics that like a quarter of the people in America think that time travel will happen before half of CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies are women. Okay, so like that's kind of scary. So I mean, I just think, and we know too, I mean, women on boards, there's all kinds of work that we have to do. I think you all probably have talked about this a lot this week, and I just think companies that can then lead by example, it's just never been more important. And look, I think again, I know Erin and I were talking about it, this is a time in which government is not going to lead. Look at female representation in our cabinet. Look at female representation in elected office. It's abysmal. And this is an opportunity, I think, for women, for businesses to lead the way where government is completely falling behind.
Yeah. So many people look to you as a powerful voice in a really uncertain time, and so no pressure. But what advice do you have for corporate leaders who are trying to find their voice?
I mean, I just think it's like, don't wait for instructions and do what you believe is right. And really, I do think, I know that so much conversation's been going on because of all the sexual harassment stories that are finally coming out, although it's kind of really, I mean, these stories have existed for our entire lives, right? It's just incredible that it's because Hollywood people or women of privilege who have been bravely told their stories that people are finally paying attention. But I do think this is a moment in which we can challenge our employers and our businesses to just do right by women and be bolder and bigger than they've ever been before. I hope we see that happen. I think the ground is shifting. I really do. And so I just hope that you leave here today, women and men, and I guess I'd say to the men in the audience, this is the time to be just the most badass advocate for women you can be in your company. Do not wait for the women in your company to take on the access to reproductive health care or importance of paid family leave or importance of affordable child care. These are issues that we need you to own with us. It's so powerful when you speak up. We see you.
Excellent. I don't think there's any more Twitter questions, so I just want to leave with one closing question, and that is, if you were to go back in time and give advice to the young girl that you once were, what would it be, and what would be your advice to all the women in the audience?
Well, I think my mom used to always feel like my mother was a housewife, as we used to call it in the day, long before she got to be governor of Texas. And she had spent many of her years just sort of doing what she thought she was supposed to do. And it wasn't until she got fully liberated and took on the world that I think she felt like that she'd lost a lot of time. And so I do think she would say to you, and she used to say to me, is just, this is the time to, don't wait until you have the perfect amount of experience. Don't wait till, and I think women are, and I see this with women employees all the time, they say, well, I don't have that degree, or I don't know the right people, or I haven't taken that course, and just like throw that away. Men don't have those hang-ups. It's important to just throw yourself out there and never turn down a new opportunity. I think that's what I've learned is that, Mom used to say, what's the worst thing that could happen is it doesn't work out, and then you go do something else. But I do think it's about living your best life, and so I hope you do. I hope you will.
Well, wise words from your mom, and thank you just so much for your great insights. And please join me in thanking Cecile.
Yeah. Good to see you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, that was inspiring, and hopefully you all feel ready to go back and be your badass self in the world. So, so thank you for that. I do just want to close by thanking the entire BSR team. There's a lot that goes into this week. I think it's gone flawlessly, and so I'd love for all of my BSR colleagues just to stand up so we can give you an appropriate thanks. Thank you also to our partners at Meet Green, who I don't know if you are in the room, but thank you. And a really special thanks to our small but really mighty conference team, Pamela Schwartz and Hetal Mamaya. I'm not sure if you are here. I think you're in the back. So our conference and BSR overall have evolved a lot over the past 25 years, and we're going to continue to evolve. But in order to do that, we need your feedback, and we need your engagement, and we need your partnership. So you can start immediately by responding to the very brief survey that's in the app, so you can give us feedback on what you liked about the conference and what you'd like to see done differently. But then I hope you'll take us up on Aaron's invitation from the opening session, where we hope you'll join us in redefining sustainable business for the year to come. This is an invitation to collaborate with us in the coming year to shape a new agenda, a new approach, and a new voice for business that's going to meet this unique moment in time. Please join us now for this evening's 25th anniversary reception, and hopefully you will join us next year, November 6th through 8th in New York. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful night.